There is only one man in the whole of history to be called great after his scholastic work. To contemporary, he is the father of modern research, and he is called the universal doctor of the Church. It is Saint Albert the Great, Albertus Magnus. At the time, he was full of knowledge in all the areas of human knowledge at the time. He studied science, biology, veterinary, and discussion of the lives of plants. He was an astronomer and an influential man to our very modern day. But most of all, he is appreciated in our Catholic Church as showing that scientific truth does not contradict our faith, because faith is also truth. He wrote on astronomy, physics, chemistry, anthropology, mineralogy, cosmography, and many other subjects. It is amazing that he was the first man to write about the weasel and the polar bear. He catalogued in detail 144 species of birds, 113 quadrupeds, 139 aquatic animals, 61 serpents, and 49 types of worms. These include diagrams and detailed writings of their habits. He was the first man in 1,500 years to write about plants. And he wrote about bees, ants, spiders, eels, salmon, and their habits. At a time when dissecting animals and humans was forbidden by law, he dissected the dead animals, and he discovered their internal organs, and so he knew more about dentistry, more about medicine than his contemporaries of the time. But as every great man, he always has his enemy. Some people, overzealous people, put him up as a great teacher, but wanted to ruin his Catholicism, his power in theology. And so they called him a practicer of magic. And so for many years it was catalogued that he was a practicer of magic, which in fact was a reference to science. He disposed of many popular myths of the time, such as that a pelican feeds on its young, that when a chicken dies, a snake hatches from her last egg. He believed the world was a sphere under the influence of Aristotle, his favorite writer. He also discussed that at the time, people believed that the moon's craters, the shadows that you saw on the moon, were a reflection of the mountains and seas of the earth. He, however, said this was the surface of the moon, the natural shape of the moon. He knew how to create gunpowder, even though it is believed the Chinese invented it. He was, it could be said, invented it after they did, without the knowledge of it yet. He conducted many chemical experiments and found that, which only recently was found, and suggested that synthetic metals can sometimes be just as equal to some natural ones. He is most revered in Spain, for he had many great connections with Dominican friars of Spain. Among his friends, a fellow Dominican, Anthony Vespucci, was the uncle of Amerigo Vespucci, who would later on name the New World, and was also a friend of Diego Deza, the confessor of Isabella, Queen of Spain, who would later argue that Columbus's case could be possible. However, he took the idea of the world being a sphere from Aristotle, his Saint Albert the Great's most revered philosopher of the ancient world. On December 16th, 1941, Pope Pius designated him as the patron of veterinarians and those with scientific research. He says that those who use humility, truth, will find the truth in God and find that things of our world can help us reach above. Albert's method of research were far ahead of his age. He didn't believe in priori, accepting past beliefs, just accepting it and following with the constraints of them. He wanted to test whether these were true. And so he went to great extents to do such things. It is believed that if other scientists, if other researchers of his time had continued his way of study, we could have achieved some of the findings of our day, some of the inventions, before the American Revolution. Now back to Aristotle. He believed he could take pagan philosophy and put it together with theology. But he did not agree with everything. He wanted to give it his own flavour so as to make it acceptable in the church. At a time when Aristotle was despised, was, if not forbidden, or had suspicion upon, he said that many things could be accepted. But he did not believe, as some nobility believed, that Aristotle was like a god. Because he said, if you believe that Aristotle was like a god, then he would never have made a mistake. But if we believe, and we know that Aristotle was a man, then he is liable to mistake. Just as the rest of us. He also believed that God's miracles did not have to be obvious things in our lives. There could be the small miracles of nature, of a bird laying its eggs and then them hatching. He even thought it was a great sin to be looked for miracles, but to see and study nature. We have not to inquire how God, the Creator, may, as he freely wills, use his creatures to work miracles, and thereby show forth his power. We have rather to inquire what nature, with its imminent causes, can naturally bring to pass. Back to his methods of research. As I said, he did not accept priori, past beliefs, so went to great extents in studying the animals. Once, a seagull was laying its eggs on a cliff. He has to hoist down another Dominican, a young Dominican, to see if it was true that the seagull's young, that only one, survived. He was born in 1206 AD, but he could have been born in 1193 AD, from many references, in Bavaria. He lived most of his life in Cologne, although he did travel to Spain, France, Strasbourg. He was a bishop in his life, and his parents brought him up as a good Catholic. They were of lesser nobility and served the emperor. We know that he had one brother who also entered the Dominican convent. Familiar titles of the day, which people refer to as Saint Albert, was Albert the German, Albert of Cologne, Albert of Botstadt, Albert the theologian. But it was not until John Vitry, later, in 1343, named St. Albert as Albertus Magnus, is when history accepted this name till now. As a young man, St. Albert accompanied his uncle to Padua, and there he studied. And hearing the inspirational speeches of Dominican Jordan of Saxony, who taught about humility rather than knowledge, full-on knowledge, he had a zest to enter the Dominican order. But it always disturbed him that he found it hard to be humble. Humble in his research. Humble in telling people what he knew. But he decided he wanted to enter the Dominican order. But his uncle forbid him, or maybe discursed with him, to wait until he was older. He was ordained a priest in 1233 AD. And he had no doubts that he had entered the right order. It was later that once again Blessed Jordan of Saxony gave another speech, which no longer gave him trouble to his conscience. That the devil deceived the unwary by suggesting to them that they could not persevere. Now, his name is not known in history. It is forgotten quite sadly nowadays. But the thing that we most remember about him in a common pool of people is this event. He was a great teacher. People from all over Europe came to his lectures because he was so renowned in teaching philosophy and science and theology. But in one of his lessons, there was a young boy, half Sicilian, half German. And his name was Thomas Aquinas. Thomas. And his friends called him the dumb ox, because he didn't speak much. He would hardly lift his voice. But one day, the teacher, St. Albert, asked some questions on fundamental truths of theology to be argued to the dumb ox, St. Thomas. And he knew how to thump some hard questions of theology. But St. Thomas answered everything with properness and decisiveness. And he said that you call him the dumb ox, but one day the bellowing of this ox will resound all over the world. It is believed that later St. Albert moved this student next to his monastery in a cell and conversed with him quite regularly on his walks. In his life, he liked to walk. He liked to make repetitive things so as he could relax his mind. Later on in his life, however, his health faltered and then turned into a shuffle. He then became prior of his province of the Dominican order, which included 40 convents and 1,000 Dominicans. This included parts of Switzerland, Germany, Saxony, Benelux, Holland, Latvia, and parts of Poland. He travelled by foot over this region, but this job of his during this life did not tire him. He felt as if this was his mission, to keep the Dominican order at the right foot, as it could be said. But then he was elected Bishop of Cologne. And even though he was a good bishop, he was disliked by his colleagues. Some of good nature said that he walked too much and continued to walk. Some of worse nature called him Boots the Bishop. St. Albert resigned from his bishopric, but he is known in later life to still ordain priests, especially of the Dominican order, be part of bishop consecration and the consecration of altars and new churches. Then, at the year of his resignation, he was made papal nuncio of Northern Europe. Now, he didn't make a great discovery such as Newton with the laws of gravity. But what he did is summarize all previous scientific knowledge for our benefit. If one great achievement could be said in his life, it would be the word Aristotle. To make Aristotle acceptable in Christian circles. He was said to be great in magic as in science, greater in philosophy, but greatest in theology. And so he did not have the temperament of a mere philosopher, a cold scientist, but the love of the theologian and a great devotion to Mary. In the terms of Aristotle, he is described as mining the ore of Aristotle. But then later students, such as St. Thomas Aquinas, would refine the metal. He introduced Aristotle to St. Thomas and began Christian Aristotelianism. He introduced theological reason. He believed that faith was greater when joined with reason. He was a great doctor of morals and a great confessor. He was said never to have rejected anyone when they asked for advice or a confession. That is not to say he was easy. Once he once gave a penance that lasted 7 years. And because he introduced Aristotle, for the first time in Europe, he introduced positivistic philosophy. And so people argued that he went off from mainstream theology, that it was too heretic in a way, that it allowed sciences to dissolve beliefs of the past. But in so he said that truth was most important, because faith was truth and scientific truth. He could also be described as the secretary of the Blessed Virgin. He placed the feast days of Mary in a special place of his heart, preaching about Mary as the perfect model for women. But he did not like the name of the second Eve, because Mary was the total opposite of Eve. Her purpose was to bring light into the world. And so there was a poem written about the differences of Thomas and Albert. For even though they taught many things, they went in different directions. Albert was the philosopher of Mary. Thomas was the theologian of the Word. The one wrote well of the Son, and the other of the Mother. Now both were great indeed, but one was pupil, and the other master. But people were simple in those times. They wanted to know basic facts so as to be closer to Mary, to feel as she really was her mother, their mother. So many questions arose, like what age was Mary when the angel came to her? What did the angel look like? At what time did the angel come? And so he answers these questions with deductive logic and reasoning with a strange or beautiful simplicity. One of the questions were, in what form did the angel come? Some said that it was the snake, second Eve, some connections. And I forgot to say this, but he showed both sides of an argument, or more than just the argument he believed in. St. Bede said that it was a serpent, but others said it was a dove, so that showed peace, light, new life. But St. Albert believed that the angel came in human form. But then they asked, what sex did the angel came in? Now, some believed, well, a woman, a female to a female, a virgin to a virgin. But then again, St. Albert says that most of these apparitions to Elizabeth, to her husband, to the coming of the Saviour, were men, angels. So he said it was more likely to be a young man to show youth and happiness. It was a young man due to something of the perfection of vital power. Then they discussed what time did the angel come. Now it could have been morning when she just began to work or pray. But then again it could have been at noon when Jesus would die and when the sun was at the height of its power. But then it could be at night time. For it's said that Jesus came in the fullness of time. And then they asked what age was Mary. Well, he said that she had to be at the height of grace and maturity, between the age of 25 and 31. And then he described Our Lady's beauty as a reddish skin colour with mild brown features, or tanned features, and then which went to the beauty of her son. And so he was with the common and simple people. He was a great benefactor in promoting the practice of statues of Mary, of shrines of Mary, on the routes in Europe, on the paths that he would walk to the monasteries. He is a unique promoter of the Blessed Virgin. So he was the heart of a scholar. He had a passion for truth. But this passion had to also have justice. And as I said, he was a great confessor, and many would come to him. But he is the first man to put moral philosophy separate from philosophy. That can be given to his name. He disagreed with the oppression of the poor and had to lecture many of the nobility. He found sometimes money as a weakness and power as a weakness too. We see that he disagreed with the position of bishop, so he resigned later on. And he was also a great mourner. For St. Thomas Aquinas died before St. Albert the Great. And he wept. Such a great mind had been lost, even though he knew his achievements. In his older age, he started to was in ill health. It is said he was a short man, but of broad shoulder, and a man of great endurance. Modern studies, have found that in the relics in Cologne, where the last in 2005 World Youth Day in Cologne, it is said that he suffered from chronic rheumatism for much of his life. So he was of ill health. But St. Albert was humble, and he liked solace movements. He would walk back and forth. He also did not fear death. He wanted union with God through science, through prayer, through theology, through philosophy. And he said that it was a blessing from God if we have a proper approach to death, if it is a proper fear of death. Besides his devotion to Mary, he also had a great devotion to the Holy Eucharist, to the sacrifice of Mass. He wrote many works on the Mass, 165 quarto pages on the Eucharist, 243 pages, 33 sermons. Pope Pius XI most revered this work, saying that from that time people started to understand that this was truly the body and blood of Christ. At the time he was called, just like Bernard of Clairvaux before him, to help with the announcing of the Crusades in northern parts of Germany. He was, however, even though full of zest and hope and love, unable to make any movement in that area towards the Crusades. Of the men in the world, Aristotle to Leibniz, who knew everything, it is also said that after his funeral, everyone said to him, "You knew all that was knowable." It is said he catalogued around 20 million words. Some say even more, twice as more by some estimates. He taught in Paris, in Cologne and other universities, and he has countless lectures. He is the man who has left us with knowledge about what happened before us. He is the single greatest writer of an encyclopedia. Most encyclopedias which we can buy from a shelf are nowhere near as great as the one he wrote. He compiled it all by himself. Cardinal Newman, who wrote about all the doctors of the church at his time, a great convert from Anglicanism to Catholicism, could not even compare his work to what St. Albert had done. He had a thirst for knowledge and deserved the name of Albertus Magnus. Now St. Albert, as I said, was suffering from ill health, and his steps were becoming into a shuffle. But he still went to the second Council of Lyon in 1277, where he supported some of St. Thomas Aquinas' theories. But then he died in a wooden armchair, and the fellow Dominicans sang the Salve Regina. The word went through Cologne that he was dead. Abbot Albert was dead. But he was not canonized or beatified in the same way as others. The message went to the Pope, and he said that they could call him blessed defaultly. And 30,000 people at that time in Cologne came to his feast. 20 years later, he said a colleague of a Dominican colleague of Albert saw Albert in a dream, and he told him, "Because in my lifetime I drew many persons out of the darkness of ignorance to the life of truth. 6,000 souls have been granted freedom from purgatory." St. Albert's relics are now found in the Church of St. Andrew in Cologne. As I said, his greatest achievements were that of Aristotle, making an encyclopedia, and joining reason with faith. But this is a final thought I would like to give to you. He believed that we could use pagan philosophy in such a way that his practice of using this philosophy was like taking the weapons of the enemy and using it against them. It was like snatching a weapon from the enemy's hands. St. Albert the Great's feast day is November the 15th. Thank you.